Vladimir Putin, who I think has Trump figured out quite well and is going to lecture him on all the reasons why Russia's maximalist demands ought to drive the peace negotiations forward. So I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned that Putin will just simply take this summit as an opportunity to try to roll Trump for that, and get him to publicly announce that the United States is essentially accepting the Russian position lock, stock, and barrel, or with very few modifications.
From the Times, this is The World in 10. I'm delighted to be joined by David Salvo of the Alliance for Securing Democracy, the German Marshall Fund think tank. David, welcome.
Thanks.
Amid all this talk of land swaps, trade-offs, is there a sense Ukraine's resources have become bargaining chips in this negotiation?
Well, I think the administration does look at the question of resources pretty closely. I mean, obviously, this is an administration that's focused on economic benefit, economic gains. So the areas that Russia currently occupies and the territory that it wants to annex further, those are economically rich areas. I mean, these are areas of Ukraine that are rich in minerals, rare earth metals. There's access to Black Sea ports. So this is significantly important territory for both Russia and Ukraine, for that matter. And I think that will come up probably in the course of discussions tomorrow in Alaska. So Ukraine certainly can't afford to lose more territory. I think there's questions about whether, say, the line of control is frozen in place, but Ukraine, it's just a non-starter to even be talking about territorial swaps, and this area in particular is just sort of critically important to Ukraine's vitality.
So critically, economically important. What kind of resources are there in this part of Ukraine?
Yeah, well, it's agriculturally rich, and Ukraine's often seen as a breadbasket of Europe, and parts of Ukraine that aren't controlled by Russia right now are still agriculturally rich, but nonetheless, the Donbass in particular is an important source of food and an important export source for Ukraine. It's a great source of lithium and other sorts of elements and rare earth metals as well that are extremely valuable on the world stage. We think about chips and the supply of chips, for example, that fuels all of our technology. That's a critical resource that Russia would essentially be stealing from Ukraine. And then, of course, there's the access to the Black Sea, which Russia enjoys having annexed Crimea, but would take over even more port access, blocking Ukrainian exports via sea routes, taking over natural gas reserves. So these are important resource-rich areas of Ukraine that Russia strategically has had designs on for obviously quite some time.
As you say, Russia stealing these resources. This must be billions or even trillions of dollars worth of economic value.
It is, and there are reasons why Russia wants this land besides just the guise of wanting to support and defend ethnic Russians who live in eastern and southern Ukraine. I mean, these are incredibly important territories, and if Russia is going to emerge stronger on the international stage once it stops being an international pariah after there's a peace negotiation, presumably, then it's all to their benefit to take over land that allows them access to all these valuable commodities.
As well as Russia getting these commodities, Europe relies on buying them from Ukraine rather than from Russia. This could just damage European energy security.
It could. And there's already been a movement afoot for quite some time in Europe to diversify its energy supplies, and I think the United States has a vested interest in that as well. But absolutely, this definitely puts the ball back in Russia's court, being potentially an important energy supplier for all of Europe.
In your experience, you previously were with the State Department, you're a long-time Russia specialist. In your experience of these sort of negotiations, is it usual to see a finance minister, the head of a sovereign wealth fund, coming along for the talks, as we see the Russian delegation in Alaska are doing today?
No, that is exceptionally rare. Maybe it's happened before, but I'm hard pressed to think of an example. But the head of the sovereign wealth fund, he is incredibly plugged in to the inner circle in the Kremlin, and because there are inevitably going to be questions raised about the economics of any sort of peace deal, you can be sure that he's going to play an important role.
Something that's being reported is that Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, has been briefing the president on economic trade-offs the American side may be willing to make. What could you see those trade-offs being?
Well, some of them will probably involve sanctions. I imagine that the Treasury Secretary is briefing the president on the types of sanctions relief that Russia would be interested in, and the types of sanction relief that the administration might be prepared to offer as a bargaining chip for a ceasefire. I imagine that is Scott Bessent's primary role here.
These kind of sanctions that we're talking about are ones that the G7, in terms of the oil price cap that we talk about, and European nations have been involved in enforcing and kind of administering. Will European allies of the US go along with any kind of agreement that's made at these negotiations?
I don't think so. I don't think Europe is going to, and rightly, Europe will not go along with any deal if it's not a party to the talks. And the same goes for Ukraine, for that matter. I mean, these are bilateral talks between the United States and Russia. Even if there is U.S. sanctions relief, Europe is in no position to match that. And I can't imagine that the United States has all that much leverage to coerce the EU in particular to remove sanctions that are an important source of leverage in any negotiation with Russia. So I hope that it's not an outcome of tomorrow's talks that we're suddenly going to remove all this leverage, economic leverage that we have over Moscow right now. And it would, although I don't expect Europe to follow suit, it still would put them in an uncomfortable position to suddenly be the main sanctions implementer against Russia.
Before he travelled to Anchorage, Vladimir Putin was praising Trump's sincere efforts to seek peace, even as the Kremlin restated its position. Its desires are unchanged. But Trump is saying a deal is more likely than not. In terms of leverage, who is going to have to blink first?
I think President Trump will have to blink first. I mean, what I expect is a whole lot of flattery by Putin of Trump, and a whole lot of lecturing of Russian talking points. And while I actually believe the President Trump's sincerity in wanting to advance peace, I think he wants to be seen internationally as a global peacemaker. So I take him at his word there. He's also susceptible of sort of falling prey to whoever is last in his ear. And he's about to have a 3-hour meeting with Vladimir Putin, who I think has Trump figured out quite well, and is going to lecture him on all the reasons why Russia's maximalist demands ought to drive the peace negotiations forward. So I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned that Putin will just simply take this summit as an opportunity to try to roll Trump for that, and get him to publicly announce that the United States is essentially accepting the Russian position lock, stock, and barrel, or with very few modifications.
After that summit, after that meeting, we'll see Trump and Putin sitting at a press conference, and we'll get some more detail about when or if another meeting will happen, perhaps with Zelensky. We've had a week where Zelensky and Europe have been maybe showing more unity than we've seen before. Who right now, as we sit here on Friday, before the meeting takes place, will be feeling most optimistic?
I think the Kremlin is the party that's feeling most optimistic right now. They've essentially got what they wanted. They got Putin back on the global stage in the United States, in Alaska, where he can grandstand next to Trump at a podium and essentially tout that the United States is seeing things Moscow's way. So I think it's good that there was an emergency summit that Europe held with Ukraine yesterday. Like, that's important to showcase European unity, to showcase that whatever the outcome is of this summit, this is not a done deal. There are parties to this conflict who are not at the table right now, who must be, to advance these negotiations forward. So I think that is good. That was a good showcase of unity. But ultimately, the winner already, I think, is Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin.
Will Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin be satisfied if, as is being reported, there's an occupation, 20% of Ukraine is held by Russia, maybe not accepted as ceded territory, but they hang on to it for the foreseeable future. Will they be satisfied, or will they just keep trying to destabilize that rump of what's left of Ukraine?
I don't expect Russia to honor any agreement that comes out of tomorrow's summit. So even if the lines of contact are frozen in place and there's sort of de facto recognition that Russia controls that 20% of Ukrainian territory, I fully expect further incursions to try to take off more territory. And maybe there will be a lull in the violence to placate President Trump, who does genuinely want a ceasefire. But I do not expect Russia to stop. And without any clarity on what the future security guarantees will look like for Ukraine, then a ceasefire simply allows Russia to reconstitute its forces and at some future date try to take more territory in a more robust and full-throated manner. So I just don't expect this to be the end of hostilities.
If we think back to this focus on Ukraine's natural resources, was that focus an inevitable outcome of this negotiation, given Donald Trump's famously transactional approach to diplomacy and Russia's choice of which bits of Ukraine they've really hung on to and pushed for?
I'm not sure that the economic factors were the primary motivator for the Russian invasion, although it's certainly a secondary benefit for them of taking over all this resource-rich land and crippling the Ukrainian economy in the process. But it is an important factor for the Trump administration. I think if there are economic benefits that they could extract from Russia as a result of any sort of bilateral negotiation, you could be sure that they will try to do that. I don't know if it's necessarily the paramount consideration. I think Trump truly does want to be seen as a peacemaker, and he sees this war in particular, but most wars, I think, as detrimental to the economic health of the United States and sort of stability in the world that would allow commerce to thrive. So, I'll take him at face value for that, but I don't think he cares much beyond that. Like, there's no sort of big geostrategic interest here for the United States from his perspective. I have a different perspective on that, but that's the president's view. The economics, I think if they could extract some concessions from Russia here, they already have from Ukraine, remember earlier in the year, you can be sure that that's going to be on the table.
David Salvo, Managing Director of the Alliance for Securing Democracy. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.